Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Transportation and Environment Subcommittee on Appropriations. We have three agencies to hear the budgets of this afternoon. I apologize for the delay. We had both a supplemental hearing on the supplemental budget, and then some of us were over in the Environment and Transportation Committee hearing about the Great Maryland Outdoor Act legislation. I guess they want to spend some money over there, so they sent some appropriators over to help them do that. So with that, why don't we turn to our first agency, which is the Maryland Energy Administration, and our analyst, Samuel Quist from DLS.
Thank you and good afternoon. I will share the document on the screen so y'all can see it. As mentioned, this is the budget analysis for the Maryland Energy Administration. The fiscal 23 allowance totals $74.5 million, which is a $19.5 million decrease, or about a $20.7 million decrease from fiscal 22. This decrease is primarily due to increased fiscal 22 spending, as well as a decrease in the amount of funds budgeted from the Maryland Gas Expansion Fund in fiscal 2023. Turning to the performance analysis section of the document, Exhibit 1 is showing the Jane E. Lawton Conservation Loan Program spending compared to energy savings in each year. In fiscal 21, there's a total of $1.6 million in 3 projects, which represents about 78% of total funding available through the program. And in fiscal 2022, the program is again set up so that there are funds reserved for both state agencies and nonprofits for the first half of the year. This arrangement ensures that there are funding available for both categories of entities. However, it makes funding available to state agencies in the second half of the year if there is increased demand among those entities, as has occurred historically in this program. Exhibit 2 is showing the energy savings and spending for the energy efficiency grant programs that the agency provides. MEA is anticipating a growth in energy savings in fiscal 21, despite a decrease in overall spending that year. This is driven by several large projects driving up the projected energy savings. Within the 2 different categories, the low and moderate income energy efficiency project savings is projected to grow by 21.8%, and the all other energy efficiency savings is projected to increase by 15.7%. Spending in fiscal 22 is increased, and as a result, it's anticipated that the energy savings will continue to grow in future fiscal years. Exhibit 3 is showing the total in-state renewable energy generation by source. This is as measured by the U.S. Energy Information Agency. There's a total of 4,200 megawatt hours of in-state renewable energy generated in calendar 2020, and the 2 largest categories were from hydroelectric and solar power, both photovoltaic and utility scale. In fiscal 2021, MEA provided approximately 2,800 grants for a variety of renewable energy generation programs to incentivize that. And this is also projected to grow in future years, although despite the fact that there's been some fluctuation in prior years. Exhibit 4 is showing statistics on the current state of the electric vehicle market in Maryland. As of the end of fiscal 21, there were just under about 35,000 zero-emission vehicles registered in the state. Additionally, there were about 2,700 public vehicle charging stations in the state. In order to incentivize the development of both of these, Maryland had previously offered the electric vehicle excise tax credit for the purchase of vehicles between fiscal 2011 and 2020. However, no credits were authorized for vehicles purchased after July 1st, 2020. MEA also currently is offering the electric vehicle supply equipment rebate program, which incentivizes the installation of electric vehicle charging equipment. And in total, MEA has incentivized just under 2,000 electric vehicle charging stations through the end of fiscal 21. And there was a piece of legislation, House Bill 894, has been introduced during this legislative session, which will extend this credit program through fiscal 2025 and increase the dollar amount that's available for these rebates. Outside of MEA, the Maryland Public Service Commission also incentivizes the development of electric vehicle charging infrastructure through its pilot program for the investor-owned utilities. And there's about 200 of these chargers that have been built out of a total of about 909 authorized through that pilot program. And separately, as I'll talk a little bit more regarding the federal infrastructure bill, there was about $7.5 billion in funding included in the infrastructure bill to develop a nationwide electric vehicle charging network. So it's anticipated that these metrics are going to continue to grow in future years as electric vehicles become more and more common. Turning to the budget discussion, I'm going to focus on fiscal 22 to begin. There was a budget amendment which totaled $31.5 million that was processed to allocate additional strategic energy investment fund revenue that was available due to higher than anticipated revenues coming into that fund in the fiscal year. About 28.6 of that was allocated to MEA programs, which you can see the allocation is shown on the screen, about 16.2 million in additional funding for renewable and clean energy programs, 8 million for low and moderate income energy efficiency, and 4.3 million for the other sectors of energy efficiency. Outside of MEA, there was a $3 million increase to the Department of General Services for projects at state facilities. The federal infrastructure bill, there's a brief discussion of that in the analysis as well. Some of this is covered in the Public Service Commission analysis related to the components relating to electric grid reliability investments. It's anticipated that the Public Service Commission will play a significant portion in overseeing those funds due to its role as the main regulatory body of utilities in the state. However, there are also a wide range of far-reaching energy-related provisions in this bill. Of the allocations that have been estimated so far for the state of Maryland, there's about an $8.9 million allocation that's projected to supplement the state energy program, which funds are annually budgeted from in the MEA budget. And there's also an additional $1.9 million coming out of the Energy Efficiency Revolving Loan Fund Capitalization Program. This fund was previously provided through the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act back in 2010, when there was money also provided to MEA from that purpose. So those are the two areas where funding allocations have been estimated. The remainder of the energy portion of the bill, the funding has not been specifically estimated for Maryland's specific allocation or how that would be divided among the state agencies. It's anticipated that there will be further guidance and further administrative actions through federal agencies later on in the year to provide more clarification on that. But some of the other notable items in the bill include a wide range of funding for renewable and clean energy sources. There's funding for some research and development grants, as well as the electric vehicle portion I previously mentioned. So it will be pretty interesting to see what that future allocation looks like, not just for Maryland, but nationwide for some of these investments into energy infrastructure. Turning now to the overview of fiscal 2023 spending, the allowance again totals $74.5 million. About 55% of the allowance is allocated to both the renewable and clean energy programs, as well as the component of that that falls under the Maryland Gas Expansion Fund. And the other two largest categories in the budget are for the two energy efficiency programs. And if we look at the spending by source, the largest portion of funding is from the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative auctions for the sale of carbon dioxide emission allowances that Maryland is a party to that interstate organization. The other large source is funds that come from Public Service Commission ordered settlements. And these are shown in Exhibit 7. This lays out the projected fund balance for each of these individual accounts. Again, the spending from these are governed by the Public Service Commission order from which they originated. And you can see from the totals, these are decreasing each year as the funds are spent. The largest item out of this category is the Maryland Gas Expansion Fund. There's approximately $18.5 million budgeted in fiscal 2023 to support grants under the Maryland Energy Infrastructure Program. This funding is resulting from the Alta Gas and Washington Gas Light merger settlement a few years ago. The other item is the Exelon Animal Waste to Energy Alternative Compliance payments. There's $705,000 budgeted in fiscal 23. These are funds from the Exelon and Constellation Energy merger. And the Offshore Wind Development Fund, there's $1.5 million budgeted from that fund. Separate from that fund and outside of the Strategic Energy Investment Fund is the Maryland Offshore Wind Business Development Fund. There's an additional $1 million budgeted in that fund in fiscal 23. And that fund is established to receive the funding from the sale of offshore wind renewable energy credits that are awarded by the Public Service Commission. Not included in the fiscal 23 budget, but also worth noting, are funds from the PEPCO Most Favored Nation provision settlement. There's $4.4 million remaining in that fund. However, MEA has indicated that due to some canceled encumbrances, it's delayed until future fiscal years, the spending out of that sub-account. So the analysis is asking the agency to comment on if they have any comments on future spending in that category. So as I previously mentioned, I'd point out that the only two categories shown in this exhibit that could potentially gain additional funding in future years are the Offshore Wind Business Development Fund due to sale of future offshore wind renewable energy credits, as well as the Renewable Portfolio Standard Alternative Compliance payments from electric suppliers. Turning to the proposed budget changes in Exhibit 8, there's a total decrease in the budget of about $19 million. The largest component is in the renewable and clean energy programs, which decreased by $17.8 million. This exhibit shows all of the different programmatic changes. I'm not going to go through each one of these individually since it's quite a lengthy list, but the largest single one, as I mentioned previously, is the Maryland Gas Expansion Fund, which decreases by $7.8 million. The allowance in fiscal 22 was $26.3 million out of this fund. However, the General Assembly during last session restricted $18.8 million of those funds. They were restricted for transfer to the Department of Human Services for energy assistance benefits. However, the funds were not released and are instead budgeted in fiscal 2023 for the Maryland Energy Infrastructure Program. The unrestricted portion of those funds, about $7.5 million, were awarded for grants under that program. The analysis is also asking the agency to comment on the use of these funds and why the funds restricted by the legislature in 2022 were not released for that purpose. Outside of that, renewable energy programs, the energy efficiency programs in the other sector outside the low and moderate income sector decreased by 3.3 million. And there's an increase in the low and moderate income sector of about 2.3 million. Turning to the personnel overview, there is one additional regular position and one less contractual position in the budget. These are both accounting specialists positions. However, MEA is noting that although similar in nature, this is not a direct contractual conversion. I'd like to also point out that the vacancy rate was 0 vacancies at the end of calendar 2021, which I thought was a little unique compared to other state agencies that we've reviewed. So I just wanted to point that out. Turning to the issue section of the analysis, this section covers more detail on the Strategic Energy Investment Fund activity. Exhibit 9 is showing the data on the quarterly regional greenhouse gas initiative emission auctions, which are for the sale of carbon dioxide emission allowances. And in auction 54, which was held in December, the allowance price grew to $13 per allowance, and the total amount of proceeds received by Maryland grew to over 44 million. These were both the highest amounts achieved during the history of the program, and there's been some pretty notable growth over the past year, as you can see from this chart. There was a total of 27 million carbon dioxide allowances sold during auction 54, which contained additional allowances under the cost containment reserve program of the program. These are additional allowances that are released for sale if the clearing price meets or exceeds a certain amount, which it did in auction 54 due to its high level. And this growth in revenue, it reflects continued high demand for these allowances, which are reflecting the admission of New Jersey to the program in 2020, the admission of Virginia in 2021, as well as speculation over the status of Pennsylvania in future years. However, there is some uncertainty, as you may have heard in the news recently, regarding the status of Virginia and Pennsylvania. Although the growth has been pretty substantial in the past year or so, in prior years, there's been more fluctuation in some years due to lower revenue than projected. This required some mid-year contractions in programming. In other years where revenues were higher than estimated, there was additional fund balance that was carried over in future years. As a result of this fluctuation, MEA in prior years had developed a conservative method of forecasting revenue using the minimum allowance clearing price, and then in the budget process, and then the actual overattainment of actual revenue over that minimum estimated price was used in future fiscal years. However, this required a delayed use of that overattainment into future budget cycles. So for example, the overattainment achieved in fiscal 21 is now being budgeted in the fiscal 23 budget cycle. In the fiscal 23 budget cycle, reflecting increased growth in auction prices, MEA is slightly altering its forecasting method, and instead of using the minimum auction clearing price for revenue projections, it's using a floating average of the two most recent actual auctions. So in the 23 budget cycle, the amount that they're using is $6.50 per allowance. This is compared to the minimum clearing price for fiscal 22, which is $2.44. So there's a little bit higher amount of revenue included in the budget. And this is allowing for a little bit closer of an alignment between the projections and the actuals. However, this method is still a conservative projection method. due to the fact that the actual auction prices have exceeded $6.50 in each auction since September of 2020. As far as the distribution of this revenue into the budget, Exhibit 10 is showing the statutory requirements for transfers to the individual sub-accounts of the Strategic Energy Investment Fund. This is laid out in the state government article. 50% is required to be distributed to energy assistance. 10% is required for each of the 2 energy efficiency sub-accounts, and 20% is required for the Renewable and Clean Energy Program sub-account. And for the administration of the account in MEA, there is a statutory cap of up to 10 million, or up to 10%, but no more than 5 million in total, whichever is the smaller amount. There are also a couple of statutorily required transfers from this account. These include the dues from the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which total about $300,000 in 2023. And there's 2.1 million from the Maryland Energy Innovation Fund. Chapters 13 and 24 of the special session earlier this winter increased the mandated transfer to that purpose from 1.6 million to 2.1 million. And the funding from that transfer supports the Maryland Energy Innovation Institute at the University of Maryland College Park, as well as the Maryland Clean Energy Center. Not funded in 2023, but authorized in fiscal 2022, there was an $8.2 million transfer to the Transportation Trust Fund to support the zero emission vehicle excise tax credits. No future transfers were authorized in fiscal 23, so there's a decrease of 8.3 million from these transfers, and as a result, that leaves an additional 8.3 million in funding that's available to be transferred to the other Strategic Energy Investment Fund sub-accounts. Exhibit 12 is showing the distribution in the budget to the different state agencies that receive strategic energy investment funds, as well as to those sub-accounts. There is 143.8 million of this funding included in the fiscal 23 budget, which is a growth of about 50.2 million. The largest category of increase is to the Department of Human Services Office of Home Energy Programs for energy assistance funding. Within the Maryland Energy Administration, the funding remains mostly stable in this area. By a net total, it decreases by just under $100,000. This is including an increase of low and moderate income energy efficiency spending, combined with a decrease of about 2.3 million total for other energy efficiency and renewable and clean energy spending within MEA. Outside of MEA, the other notable transfers include an increase of $350,000 within the Department of General Services, as well as a $950,000 decrease for the Maryland Department of Health for various energy performance contracts. And within the Renewable and Clean Energy Program sub-account, there are 2 transfers required by the Clean Energy Jobs Act of 2019. These are the small minority and women-owned business account transfer in the Maryland Department of Commerce, as well as the EARN program within the Maryland Department of Labor. As far as the projected fund balances, these are shown in Exhibit 13 for the individual sub-accounts. At the end of fiscal 2021, the total fund balance was 108.2 million. In fiscal 2022, it's projected that the fund balance will grow to 113 million. And in fiscal 2023, as has been done in previous fiscal years, it's likely understated the amount of fund balance due to the method of revenue projection. However, once the actual amounts of revenue are known, it's likely that the fiscal 23 fund balance will be higher or even exceed the 22 projected fund balance. At the end of 2021, it's noted that the fund balances are increasing due to a combination of factors. The first is due to the continued projected growth in regional greenhouse gas initiative auction revenues, combined with the altered method of forecasting these revenues by MEA. There are also a couple of other transfers from the administration subaccount, which are increasing the fund balances of the other subaccounts. The first is a transfer of fund balance and interest from the administration subaccount, specifically to the other four. At the end of 2021, as shown in Exhibit 13, the administration subaccount had built up a fund balance of over $36 million. So MEA is planning to distribute just about $30 million of that fund balance to the other four subaccounts. Also, separate from that redistribution is a realignment of revenues out of the administration subaccount due to the $5 million statutory cap on revenues transferred to the administration account. And the continued growth in overall revenues. The revenues are projected to exceed $5 million in 2022 and 23. So MEA estimates that there will be about 2.1 million projected for realignment in 2022 and 1.3 million for realignment in 2023. These specific realignments out of the administration subaccount are not required to be allocated under any specific formula. However, MEA has indicated that its plans for this realignment are similar to the percentages for the statutory allocation of overall revenue. And I believe it's included this in its testimony, about 50% for energy assistance, 13% to both of the energy efficiency accounts and 23% to the renewable and clean energy programs. A DLS is observing that this allocation percentages are a revised method of the original realignment formula that corresponds to the subaccount balances in the budget books that was initially provided. And although the revised percentages provided by MEA follow similarly to the statutory percentages, DLS is noting that the Department of Human Services allocation does not equally share in the reallocation. The other three subaccounts within MEA receive an additional approximately 3% over the statutory percentages, whereas the Department of Human Services is remaining at 50%. The second observation that the Department of Legislative Services is making is separate from this. It's related to the projected allocation of future regional greenhouse gas initiative revenues for the final two auctions in fiscal 22 and in 2023. The preliminary projections provided by MEA show a distribution of equal shares outside of the energy assistance subaccount for the other three subaccounts of approximately 16.7%. And DLS is observing that under this projected future allocation, there's concern that the renewable energy program subaccount would not meet the full 20% required under statute. As far as the recommended actions section, the last item in the analysis, DLS is making two recommendations. The first is annual language included requesting that DBM provide CEF fund accounting in the budget books next year. The second recommendation is committee narrative requesting MEA to submit a report on Maryland Gas Expansion Fund activities. That will conclude the DLS analysis, and I can take any questions at this time.
Thank you, Sam, for the thorough presentation. I see we have a question from Delegate Beitzel. Delegate Beitzel, you're on mute if you're Delegate Beitzel, can you hear us?
Delegate Beitzel, you're on mute. If you hold down your space bar, it'll unmute you.
I just found it. I got it. Sorry. I lost the screen there completely for some reason or other. Yeah, I have a question, Mr. Chairman, if I may. I can't see I had it over there. The exhibit for Reggie auction proceeds. Can you pull that up, Samuel?
Sure. Yeah, I'll pull that back up.
I
think that was. Let me find that.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
I think it was.
There was a chart. Can you show the chart?
Yeah, just let me find this chart.
Yeah, there you go. That's what I was looking for. Looking at that, it looks like, the cost of buying these credits at auction, when it started at auction 39 was, in the $12, $15 range. And now it's going up substantially. So that the allowance price is higher and the proceeds are higher. What's driving this, do you know?
Well, I think it's a combination of factors. There's been pretty high demand for purchase of these prices. I think just based on I think one of the main categories, as I mentioned, there's been some activity with states joining this organization. The state of New Jersey rejoined in 2020 and Virginia joined in 2021. There's also speculation that Pennsylvania is going to join in future years. And when additional states are joining, that affects the number of allowances that are sold. So that'll impact the demand and cause the demand to increase. I also think just based on that speculation of other states wanting to join this organization, that might also lead to increased demand. As far as the current state of the electric supply market, I'm not sure if MEA might have some more information on that, but I think there's been some pretty high demand for this also, as the state is continuing to focus on having a greater percentage of overall electric supply be from renewable energy sources. That's also leading to additional need for purchase of these allowances.
So is there, it would seem like, and it seems to me like there's obviously a move to renewable energy sources or non-carbon based fuels. So it seems like there's been coal-fired power plants shut down and being converted into gas plants, which is still fossil based, but don't pollute as much or don't release as much CO2. So it would seem like as you move away from fossil based fuels, that there would be less of a demand to need these credits, because when you're burning fuels, this drives a demand for them in other words, it's really the right to pay to pollute or to release CO2. So it would seem like you would be going the other way. So do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think the other item I would mention is that the design of this program it also decreases the amount of overall emission allowances over time. I think
Okay.
that's kind of the similar goal, is to reduce the amount of non-renewable emissions that are allowed. Although, with the increase in states joining, I think that's also had an impact. But I think that's one of the other factors that could drive prices in future. The total number of emissions allowances decreases depending on where we're at with meeting the renewable portfolio standard goals. That could have an impact on price as well, and impact the demand.
Okay, I'll move on to, if I may, Mr. Chairman, another question. You had a chart, I think, showed the renewable energy, the production of renewable energy, and had, I think, hydroelectric facilities in there.
Yes, I think this exhibit 3.
Yeah, so there hasn't been a huge big change if you look down across in the amount of renewable energy produced, but there's looking at the green bar on the right hand side, I mean the green section in the bar on the right hand side, it shows that there has been no substantial increase in hydroelectric. And I think somewhere along the line, either in budget language or something, there was a requirement that Energy Administration looked at to study the potential for hydroelectric power in the state. Do you remember anything about that?
That does sound familiar to me. I think I remember that was in a bill. I would have to look at that. Yeah, I think I do remember what you're referring to. I'd have to go look that up.
And so any reason I'm asking is
yeah,
there is some potential, obviously, and I think there's potential out in my area of the state where you have Jennings Randolph Lake that doesn't have a power plant. You have Savage River Reservoir, it doesn't have it, and there's probably other potential in Potomac River, whatever. And so the question is, are there grant funds or funds available for new hydroelectric power facilities if in fact somebody want to pursue looking at constructing them?
Well, that's a good question. I think I'd have to defer to the agency to answer that. I'm not really aware of any specific programs that they're currently offering in that area, but they may know something that I'm not aware of in that area.
And Mr. Chairman, if I one final question. Black liquor, there was a bill passed previously that took away or reduced the classification of black liquor down to where it didn't require as many credits. And, obviously this is something that Western Maryland has fought for quite some time to not take away the black liquor credit from the Verso paper mill here in Western Maryland. And I think that bill just recently did pass, and it doesn't, and there's a big portion of the renewable energy credits that were coming in were from black liquor, not just from the mill, but from other states. Do you have anything that indicates, is that the case now that there's a big reduction in the amount of black liquor credits that were granted, renewable energy credits, and do you have something to show what it is?
I believe that is there is information on that in a report. I don't have that in front of me right now, but
all right. We can follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, I think that's included in one of the reports that the Public Service Commission puts together. I remember reading about that, so I can follow up with you on that.
One challenge, Delegate Beitzel, is those reports have a very long delay in in providing useful information, I find. So maybe, Sam, we can follow up with PSC to get some more real-time information for the delegate instead of waiting for that report to update. Because I think the black liquor change was it last year or the year before, Delegate Beitzel?
I can't remember. I think it might have been the year before because the paper mill shut down, and after it shut down, so that was 3 years ago it shut down. So it's probably 2 years.
Right. But that report, which, Sam, you always share with me, is always like 2 years earlier. So there's a lot of drag on that. So we can follow up on that. Delegate Beitzel, do you have further questions?
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions from my colleagues? Okay, why don't we turn to the Maryland Energy Administration and their director, Mary Beth Tung.
Hello, am I on?
Yep.
Good. Hello to everyone, Chairman Corman, Vice Chair Krim, and other members of the Transportation Environmental Committee. For the record, I'm Mary Beth Tung. I'm the Director of the Maryland Energy Administration. And with me today is a few folks that can answer some of these more detailed questions that Delegate Beitzel was asking and others may want to ask. Our Chief of Staff is Chris Rice. He's our longest serving employee at MEA, so he knows where all the bodies are buried. So if you need to locate bodies, he can find them for you. Euphemistic bodies, of course. Our Division Director for Finance Administration, Wyatt Shiflett. Our Programs Division Director, Eric Kaufman, and Landon Farrick, I think you all know him, our legislative liaison. Mr. Farrick and Mr. Kaufman are also testifying in support of a bill for appliance energy efficiency standards today. We're hoping they don't overlap, but if so, it may be possible they may have to duck out of the proceedings momentarily. And my apologies for any inconvenience that may cause. We'd like to thank our DLS analyst, Sam Quist. This is, I believe, his first year working with us. He's got a good mentor. Our previous analyst, Tanya, and I know that he had a lot to learn this year, so appreciate all his efforts. And I also would like to mention, it was in our written testimony that MEA concurs with both of his recommendations. So I don't want to repeat our written testimony, everyone can read, but I do want to share a few of our successes over the past year. And then afterwards, of course, we'd be very happy to answer any questions anyone has. On our low and moderate income program, we've launched a new low income solar program this year. We're really happy about this one. This new program is being offered in parallel with MEA's longstanding and highly successful low to moderate income energy efficiency program, which is way oversubscribed every year. So that's one that we were hoping we could bump up somewhat. The solar program engages and builds capacity amongst the nonprofits and local governments who we currently work with to deliver energy and efficiency improvements to those most in need. We found working with this community, knocking on doors and telling them that we're the government, we're here to help them. Sometimes they don't want to talk to us, but working with folks that they trust in the nonprofit community and local governments, that's been a very successful way to reach out to that community. Delivering energy efficiency coupled with the clean energy and renewable energy provides a greater and longer term reduction in energy burden and reduces the need for future energy efficiency and energy assistance. We envision continued growth in this area of MEA's portfolio and continue to engage stakeholders to identify programming that can address clean energy access, energy affordability, and related equity issues. One thing that we have identified is with the solar, we do have a community solar program. Having the low income community solar program coupled with energy efficiency is very important so that any energy savings from the solar isn't literally going out the window. So we're trying to link those two together in some form or fashion. The Clean Fuels Incentive Program has had some unexpected benefits. MEA is in the second year of this incentive program, providing incentives for the purchase of medium and heavy duty alternative fuel vehicles for fleets. This leverages fleet commitments for alternative transportation fuels, including electrification. And in fiscal year 21, this program provided core initial funding for the Montgomery County Public Schools Initiative to launch an electrified school bus fleet. This was something we hadn't expected, and it leveraged a vehicle infrastructure lease agreement and arrangement, a model that other communities have expressed interest in replicating. I'm hearing about this from other sources outside the state, so it's really exciting to us. The Maryland Gas Expansion Fund was mentioned by Sam earlier. We've received an unprecedented demand for funding for natural gas access to reduce emissions and costs. We had over 31 million in asks this year, the largest turnout of any MEA's program. There's a strong need, particularly from public schools, to modernize systems to reduce emissions, improve comfort, improve safety, and reduce costs by eliminating aged systems that are burning dirty fuels. There are a lot of schools out there still doing heating oil and whatnot. So we're hoping to replace those systems. The CEF budget and fund balances was discussed by Sam in detail. The new budget methodology for CEF revenue will allow quicker deployment of RGGI auction proceeds in the state budget. And just to backtrack a little bit, even before Sam had come in, I think auction 36 he had talked about. And Chair Corman, I know you're really familiar with this. When the RGGI proceed had the auction prices had gone to the floor of $2.35 or whatever. And it happened very quickly over a short period of time. So we started budgeting at the floor, and then the increases started happening. So we decided that's probably a good idea to change that formula somewhat. So we've come back with a new system where we're looking at the last 8 auctions over the last 2 years and doing an average there to sort of prevent some of the ups and downs that are going to naturally occur in a market such as RGGI. It's important to maintain modest CEF fund balances. I know this isn't normal for most state agencies, in an effort to provide fiscal stability in the face of a market and continuity of CEF funded activity if and when RGGI proceed auction prices decline. And again, we had that experience and it wasn't good. We had to cut programs. We seek to eliminate or at least reduce that problem in the future. And last but not least, federal funding. There's a lot of interest in the federal funds that are available through the Infrastructure Act. We're hoping to get more information on that soon. I think Sam did a good overview of some of the funding. We're fully postured to maximize federal funding acquisition and use. And there are a lot of details in the written testimony, which I don't want to go through that again, as I mentioned. But we have multiple staff members that dealt with the ERA, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, and they have a lot of experience at pushing out federal funds and getting programs set up around the federal funding. And of course, there's a lot of shall we say, strings attached. There's a lot of requirements with that federal funding, and they're used to overseeing that. And it can be quite onerous, but we have people that are experienced in doing that. So we're closely monitoring developments coming out of the U.S. Department of Energy, and we hope that we'll get information sooner than later on some of those programs. A lot of them will be competitive, and again, we're positioned to be able to apply for those competitive programs. So if anyone has any questions, more than happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions from my colleagues? Delegate Beitzel.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This Director Tung. I'd asked a question about hydroelectric power plants.
Mm-hmm.
How, if there were any funds available to build new facilities, and you'd indicated you have people in your your agency there that are dealing with this issue and have full knowledge of it. So what could you give me the information or contact information or something, so if anyone in my area that might be interested in doing this, I could give them that information, because I've been working with the Upper Potomac River Commission down in Westernport, and we discussed doing something at Savage River. and also I know Frostburg in their water system, there's a Piney Reservoir up in Garrett County where they had to take raw water from that reservoir and take it down to Frostburg, and they applied for and built a small electric generator that supplies the electricity for their plant. So if you get some information on how anyone could pursue developing a hydroelectric facility, I'd appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Absolutely. We don't have a standing program right now for that, but we have looked at various thoughts in the past of people particularly smaller systems for community associations and that kind of thing, campus-wide systems. And, we really haven't had interest in it expressed that much in the past, but certainly we're open to it. And there's a lot of dams in the area that are not generating any power, and small hydro is one area where we can make some big differences in smaller areas. And as you point out, it is clean power. So yes, I will get some information to you. We do get unsolicited proposals on occasion for projects that are outside of regular programs. So we will be hopefully publishing something on that in the near future to let folks know what those parameters will be. So yeah, I'll get some information to you. Division Director Eric Kaufman, it would be under his division that would be offered through. So,
well, there are two large facilities up there, Jennings Randolph Lake and the Savage
right.
River. That they have no hydroelectric facilities there, and they've been looking at it for years. And we had a developer that was looking at Savage River a number of years ago, and they couldn't put the numbers together. But things being what they are, with the push to get more renewable energy, it was a good source. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Beitzel. Other questions? I have two. One, in the past, you've been able to provide really great annual data on the energy storage tax benefit, and by county and by project type. And I'm just hoping you might be able to top that off for me, maybe without language in the budget. I can email Landon as well, obviously. The second, I don't know if you want to respond to that, but.
I don't have details. I don't know if any of my staff might have details.
Yeah, I think your team probably knows exactly what I'm talking about, so we can probably just, I can.
Okay.
Email.
It's something we've been working on because, obviously it's a great program, and we've had a lot of interest in it. So I don't know where the numbers stand right now. I don't have that detail. So.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, no reason you would have that off the top of your head. The second is, I'm a little curious about your advocacy, and let me give you an example. I had a bill on green school construction, and the IAC sent a warning out to their local education agencies saying, "Oh my God, Corman has a bill on green school construction." Someone was actually kind enough to forward this to me. I felt very popular, but I guess I was a little surprised to see the IAC do that. I'm curious if MEA does anything like that. Do you put out advocacy pieces to your community based on, the various pieces of legislation that, come before the General Assembly?
No, we actually don't. And as far as green schools, we're working with the IAC on, getting energy plans put together, seeing what their needs are, so that we can start addressing them in the future. So no, we don't do that.
Yeah, you don't even do it informally. I mean, you don't say to, companies or nonprofits or entities you work with, hey, there's this bill, it's good, it's bad, it's indifferent.
Generally, it's the other way around. They're contacting us, going, have you heard about this bill? It's like, yeah, we've heard about it, So no, usually we put our testimony in for bills that are in, and that's very public, obviously, because they're part of the bill package. So no, we don't do that.
Yeah, because obviously, like, let's say I was getting, I was, not in the legislature, and I was getting the energy storage tax credit, and a bill came in about energy storage that, MEA might have some concerns about. If you told me as a beneficiary of the tax credit you all administer this bill was a problem, I might start thinking it's a problem too, and maybe, want to advocate about it. It's a little bit of a power imbalance there. So just want to make sure nothing like that's ever happening.
There's nuances that the public aren't going to understand. So that's why we like to have our testimony in writing before your committee or whoever, so it's part of the public record. So there's no confusions going on with the public. So yeah, we generally don't. Now we do talk to people, but no, we're not going to be sending those kinds of notices out.
Yeah. Okay. Other questions from my colleagues? Okay, I do not see any. So thank you, Director Tung and your administration for being here.
Thank you so much for having us.
Colleagues, we will now turn to the Maryland Department of Transportation, Maryland Transit Administration, and our analysis from Steve McCulloch. Steve?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sharing the screen for the analysis. The MTA budget for fiscal 2023 on the operating side increases by $25.5 million or 2.7%. On the PAYGO capital project budget for MTA, it's a decrease of $460.7 million or 38.6%. A lot of that is driven by high spending in 2022 for the purple line. Looking at the COVID impact on ridership, this graph shows by mode for MTA, the ridership since just prior to the pandemic. You can see the great big drop at the beginning of the pandemic, and since that time, ridership has generally improved. But as this chart shows, that improvement is not uniform. And looking especially at the bottom two, the commuter services are still about 80% below what the pre-pandemic amounts were, and even the other services with core bus are still down substantially from pre-pandemic levels. That translates into the managing for results charts. This shows a percent change by year. And as you can see, these 2021 numbers, are all down. MTA is projecting that 2022 numbers will rebound. And of course, since these are comparing the previous year, these aren't huge increases, but they are expecting increases. However, through the first quarter of the fiscal year, ridership was still down compared to 2021. So it is a little bit of a question as to whether those projections will carry forward for 2022. Looking at on-time performance, this shows the on-time performance by mode, with the black bar or line above each set of bars being the goal for that particular mode. And you can see that there's been, certainly bus has struggled to meet on-time performance. Some of the rail systems have been better. Mobility was generally good, but has been missing it. And specifically on mobility, Exhibit 4 shows for the prior calendar year. So this is 2021 calendar year, half of which was fiscal 21, and where the red line is going forward is the current fiscal year. And currently, you can see for mobility that the on-time performance is substantially below the goal for that service. And we've asked MTA to comment on the factors that are leading to that and the steps that they are taking to correct that situation. Looking at fare box recovery, there is no longer a fare box recovery requirement in terms of a specific level in statute. So what this chart does is the lines are the 5-year average ending the year prior to 2021. So you can see that, again, similar to what we've seen with WMATA and other transit systems across the United States, the reduction in ridership has really translated through to reduction in fare box revenues and recovery rates. Exhibit 6 shows performance measures. Core bus, light rails is below it. I'll scroll down in 1 second. But this shows that the passengers, are down, which is what we've just been saying. But one effect of that, because there are some costs in terms of operating, these services, the operating trip cost per passenger trip and per revenue mile, are up for, most of the services. And there's light rail, and the next one is Metro. MTA is required to compare itself amongst or to its peers across the United States. And Exhibit 7 shows this comparison for the bus system. Since the bus service is MTA's largest service, I limited this exhibit to that. And this shows the Baltimore MTA service. The first line, the second line is the average of all services, including Baltimore. And then listed below are the peers that MTA uses to compare itself against. And the shaded entries indicate better performance by the peer relative to that of Baltimore. But in general, you can see that for fiscal 2020, or reporting year 2020, Baltimore actually did better on all of these measures than the average for the group. Turning now to the agency spending, Exhibit 8 pie chart shows the distribution of spending. And as I mentioned, bus service is the largest service provided by MTA, and the budget reflects that, with just over half budget for MTA devoted to bus service, with rail operation taking another quarter of the service. Looking at the proposed budget, as I indicated at the beginning, the operating budget increases by $25.4 million, almost 25.5. You'll see these two items: the annualization of the full return to service for MARC and commuter bus, and the annual contract increases for MARC, commuter bus, and mobility are some of the biggest factors driving this increase. It is offset by some decreases in COVID cleaning costs, contracts, and supplies, although back up, you will see that there's an offsetting enhanced cleaning contract for Metro that offsets some of that. But in total, again, $25.5 million in increase. In looking at personnel, there's one additional position for the operating portion of MTA's budget. This represents an interdepartmental transfer. There is a half a position less in the capital side of things. Looking now at the capital program, Exhibit 10 shows the 6-year capital program by category for MTA, and you can see that 2022 is outsized, and we'll be talking about the changes in just a moment. But again, much of the 2022 increase is driven by purple line spending. Exhibit 11, this is the 2023 capital program for MTA, and it totals, scroll down to the bottom, totals $8.2 million. And it's listed here. I'm not going to go through all of them, but you can see some of the large items at the top with the Metro rail car and signal spending expected in 2023 is the largest line item for fiscal 2023. Looking at the programs, system preservation of minor projects, again, the largest spending item for the program section of their capital program. Exhibit 12 shows the cash flow between 2022 as introduced and the current working appropriation, and then the working appropriation to the allowance. Those changes driving those are shown in the following exhibits, with Exhibit 13 showing the changes between the 2022 budget as introduced and the working. And as I had mentioned, the first two items here show the large increase in the working appropriation related to the purple line. The first item was the advanced payoff of the private activity bonds for the project as the P3 contract got ready to onboard the new design build contractor. And the Purple Line partners and MTA thought it best to pay off the existing bonds so that the bondholders did not have a approval of their contract revisions to make the project go forward. And then the purple line, second line, that includes the settlement payments that were made under the settlement agreement. Exhibit 14 shows the cash flow going from 22 to 23. And although overall there are reductions, there are some increases, as you can see here, with Metro Rail Car and Howard Street Tunnel spending increasing relative to 2022. Scrolling to the bottom, we'll see the big decreases, and that's the purple line spending that was large in 22, drops out in 23, which leads to the overall change between the 2 years of $447 million in the capital spending. Exhibit 15 shows the significant changes since last year's CTP. You can see there were a number of items that were added to the construction project, and those include the purple line spending that we've just discussed, as well as some other new projects. They've also had projects moved from the development and evaluation project section of the program up into the construction program. And then there are new projects that have been added to the development and evaluation program that gets these projects ready for the future. The issues, starting with the issues, the purple line, that was discussed in the overview, and this subcommittee had its own briefing on that. So I'm going to skip discussion to issue 2. And issue 2 is a discussion of the capital needs inventory report. This was a requirement that was that MDOT every 3 years do a capital needs inventory. The first one was released in 2019. During the 2021 special session, statute was modified to require MTA to submit annual reports each beginning this year, each January, detailing the capital spending that was programmed and actual spending in the prior fiscal year. Since this was the first report, MTA submitted the report and detailed the previous 3 years of spending. And as you can see from these 2 charts, these charts show the percent of spending compared to what was programmed. And so in all categories in 2021, spending was just about 66% of what was originally programmed for these items for state of good repair, and down for the enhancements, it was much better, but still, generally speaking, the spending has been less, and we've asked MTA to discuss the factors. They did note in the report that the pandemic has caused, as it has in many other areas, delays in capital spending. The next issue comes from committee narrative that it was budget language that the subcommittee and then ultimately the General Assembly adopted last session, requesting that MTA report on locally operated transit systems and the services they provide, particularly as it relates to non-emergency medical transport. So the bulleted list here shows the types of service that locally operated transit systems or lots provide, and it runs the gamut from fixed rate service. There are demand response services where there are requests for door-to-door service, fixed route with modification where there's generally a modification, a fixed route, but people can request deviation within certain parameters. There's paratransit that some lots operate, and then there are also user-side taxi subsidies that are all used. Now, the non-emergency medical transport, that term can be used in a general sense for any non-emergency medical service that an individual would seek. Could be just as simple as a doctor's visit could qualify for that. But the term non-emergency medical transport generally relates to the federal Medicaid program, and Medicaid requires that states provide transportation for low-income individuals and families, pregnant women, and the elderly to health services as needed. And a portion of the Medicaid funding to the states is used and allocated for this purpose. Funding in Maryland in 2022 is at a base level of nearly $44 million. And this exhibit shows the allocation by county. It says base award because with Medicaid being an entitlement program, if a county were to exhaust all of its funding, but still have recipients that require transportation to medical needed appointments, then there would be a requirement for additional funding. So according to MTA's report, 4 lots provide some Medicaid funded non-emergency medical transport under contract. And they also note that non-emergency medical transport regulations do require county health departments to screen for the availability of public transportation. and to refer clients to those services when available. So if a client is able to take public transit and it is available, that's generally how they are supposed to get to those services. Interestingly, the Task Force to Study Transportation Access, which was created by legislation in 2019, also just issued its final report last December. And it also commented on non-emergency medical transport and indicated that there are many non-emergency medical transport passengers that require services or levels of care that lots staff and services really cannot provide. And it recommended an improvement of on-demand paratransit services and improvement of collaboration between medical transportation providers as a means of improving assisted transit access for these services. So it's generally clear that while lots do provide some non-emergency medical transport, they are not the primary means of meeting this. And it is also difficult to determine actually what the level is, because except for some of the demand services where people call and make a reservation for transport, the lot systems don't record trips by type of trip. I mean, somebody gets on the bus driver doesn't know, why they're taking the bus. So that basically, I guess the conclusion of this was for people who are looking for, meeting additional non-emergency medical transport, lots can be, one piece of that, but it doesn't appear to be the solution that some, might hope it would be. Looking at the recommended actions for MTA, both the operating and the capital recommendation is to concur with the governor's allowance. I will note one update, and this is simply because there was restricted funds that were restricted in MTA's budget based on them providing a report on adding service to the Trade Point Atlantic. MTA did submit that report, and back in September, they had reworked their bus routes and provided some enhanced service, and indicate they will continue to evaluate service needs to Trade Point Atlantic as it does to the rest of its system. And I just point this out because of the restrictive language. If the committees have any concerns with this, it should be noted during the decision process. Otherwise, if there are no concerns, then at the end of the budget hearing process, the release of funds letter will be processed to allow them to access that funds. And that concludes my presentation, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you as always. Are there questions for the analyst? Delegate Beitzel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Steve, very, very thorough report. Commend you on your knowledge of the subject matter and how you always present it to us very well. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
I just have one question on the purple line. With that payment off of the bond, what he paid off the bond, and with the settlement with the contractor, those two amounts, one's 300 some million and the other's 200 some, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Does that come from Transportation Trust Fund, out of the general fund, and is it rolled into the total cost of this project upon completion?
So the bond repayment was already programmed for the project. And so it was repaid early from the trust fund. And if it had not been repaid early, once the project opened service, it would have been repaid over time from the Transportation Trust Fund. So that didn't increase the cost at all. That was simply a timing issue of when those funds were being paid off. The settlement payment obviously was an increase that was unexpected, when the project began. And again, it was paid for from the Transportation Trust Fund because this is a transportation project and transportation is paid from the Transportation Trust Fund.
But that will be, that at least the settlement payment will be added to the total cost of the project upon completion, right?
Correct. It is part of the total cost.
All right, thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. Any other questions for the analyst? Okay, well, thank you again, Steve. As we turn to the department agency, I just want to remind folks, we have some of us have capital budgeted for, and I know there's always, certainly I'm the chief offender here, plenty of questions for MTA, and we still have another department after this. And just in that interest, I just want to goose one of your responses before you even start, Mr. Secretary, Madam Administrator. It's going to be about mobility, obviously a huge issue of concern. And the thing about it is, I know your response is going to talk a lot about pandemic, what's going on with the workforce, all valid issues. But of course, you all have been doing this for a while, and you know that the issues of mobility long predate COVID. It was 75% on-time approval or 74% on-time approval in April of 2019, which is before anyone knew what a coronavirus was. We just thought it was Steve McCulloch's favorite beer. So we need to talk about things beyond just COVID when we're talking about how we're going to get mobility working in a better way. And I know that paratransit is hard everywhere. I follow the Metro Access system. They have their fair share of problems. But as you're answering that question, when you get to it, just please put an "and" after you talk about COVID. I'll just ask that for that up front. And with that, let me turn it over to you, Mr. Secretary, and Administrator Arnold. Thanks for being here.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Chairman Corn, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Jim Port, Secretary of Maryland Department of Transportation. And with me today is Holly Arnold, the Administrator, MDTA, Mass Transit Administration. Let me say it's a pleasure to be before the committee and to share some of the incredible work that MTA has been doing. But before I get to that, I just want to thank Steve once again for his outstanding analytical work. As Delegate Beitzel said, he does an outstanding job, and we agree. So throughout the pandemic, the employees of MTA have shown up every day to provide the critical services that their riders depend on, and that we owe them, and we owe them a tremendous thanks for that. In addition to keeping riders moving, MTA has been focused on enhancing core service, which includes MTA receiving Board of Public Works approval in October 2021 for the next generation state-of-the-art fare system replacement project. This $63.6 million project enables MTA to begin implementing a next generation fare system, which will be phased in beginning in 2023 and is anticipated to be fully operational by 2025. The system will include new fare boxes, validation equipment, and ticket vending machines, an expanded retail network, and improvements to mobile ticketing. Ultimately, the new system will result in more payment options for customers, shorter vehicle dwell times, and provide MTA with better ridership and reliability data. On top of that, MTA is very well under the way with our regional transit plan corridor studies. Currently, there are two opportunity alignments: north-south, which is from Towson in Baltimore County to downtown Baltimore, and of course, east-west, which goes from Bayview Hospital to Elegant City. All modes are currently under consideration, and MTA will be opening the east-west plans for public comment in April, May of this year, and north-south in June or July. These are just a few examples, but it's clear to see that even with all the challenges over the past year, MTA has now slowed down a bit and remains committed to improving transit for residents throughout the region. So again, I'd like to thank the committee for the opportunity to present today, and I'd like to hand it over to Holly Arnold to address the budget analysis and share a short presentation. Holly?
Thanks, Secretary Ports. Good afternoon, Chair Corman, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Holly Arnold, and I'm the administrator of the Maryland Department of Transportation, Maryland Transit Administration. And I'd like to echo Secretary Ports' thank you to Steve McCulloch for his detailed review and analysis. He's always incredibly helpful and professional and asks some really great questions. So we appreciate that, Steve. I do have a short presentation I would like to share. So I will pull that up now. Okay, can you see that?
That looks good.
All right, great. So I'm going to go through, just want to highlight some accomplishments that MTA has had over the past year. So first, North Avenue Rising. This is a 2017 Tiger grant that MTA won in coordination with Baltimore City. So it's a $27.3 million project to make improvements along the North Avenue corridor in Baltimore City. So along that corridor, we launched in November 7 new miles of dedicated bus lanes, which are already having a huge impact in terms of travel time savings on the corridor and really expanding the dedicated bus lane network in the city. We're continuing to work with the city to finalize that project now, and we'll be opening the final pieces of that later this year. Along those lines, we were awarded the newer version of a Tiger grant called a RAISE grant this past fall. So we received $50 million total project for an east-west priority corridor, again, in Baltimore City. This is a 20-mile corridor that will include, improvements to transit, ADA, pedestrian, and bicycle along the corridor. Again, expanding that dedicated bus lane network. So we're going to have another 10 miles of dedicated bus lane, transit signal priority, and then further amenities to improve the pedestrian, bicycling, and transit experience along the corridor. We do continue to invest in customer experience enhancements. I think that's one way to really recognize the importance of the people that have been here throughout the pandemic and our riders, and also just continue to improve that system. And when folks are ready to come back and ride the system again, they will see these improvements. One of the biggest ones that I've seen is real time. So we launched real time initially in 2018, and it is now available on our core bus system, Metro, MARC, and commuter bus. Most recently, we launched in December of 2021 on the Metro. I will say, as a rider, it has made a huge difference for me. I can leave, look in my office, see the Metro is going to come in 5 minutes, and I know I have enough time to leave and get down there. So I hope that our riders are appreciating that as well. We're currently testing on the light rail system and anticipating launching that later this spring. On the bus side for real time, we launched real-time crowding information. That's something that a lot of folks have really asked for during the pandemic when they wanted an opportunity to space out more. And so they are able to look on the transit app before they get on the bus and see if it's going to be crowded or not, or if they want to make different choices. And for those who don't have phones, we're looking to expand our digital signage throughout the system. So we recently added 3 new locations as part of a $3.5 million Beyond the Bus Stop grant that we received from FTA a couple years ago. We're looking to continue to improve that first last mile experience. One thing that folks asked for a lot, especially on our MARC system, was being able to bring on e-bikes and scooters. And so this fall, we changed the policy, and those are now allowed on all of our systems. And then finally, we've launched some new fare products to really kind of recognize the changing needs of our riders. And so Charm Flex is 3 and 10-day passes that are available through Charm Pass. They can be used on consecutive or non-consecutive days. So if you're coming into the office just 3 days a week, Charm Flex is perfect for you. It does have a 15% discount from a single day pass. And we are continuing to invest in those dedicated bus lanes. The ones that we have, we've repainted red this past December and added the 7 additional miles as part of North Avenue Rising. Just want to speak on mobility service. So, Chair Corman, as you noted, we did have some issues in 2019. Those were primarily associated with the prior service contract. So previously, at that point in time, we went from 3 contractors down to 2. And as part of that transition, a lot of operators were leaving that one service contractor who wasn't renewed. And so we had a lot of issues there. Prior to the pandemic, we were in the 90s, which is our goal. That said, we know that the paratransit service can always be improved across the country. It's something that transit agencies are looking at, and we are as well. Some of the biggest things that we've done are really on the recruitment and training side. So we put a wage increase for operators that went into effect in October 1st of 2021. You can see here on the chart on the right that it had a pretty immediate stabilizing effect on the system because those operators who were already here also got an increase. So they were more willing to show up to work, more willing to do overtime because of that wage increase. Since then, it does take some time to hire and train operators. And so they've been bringing them on. We are up about 40 operators from where we were at that point in time. We're also helping out the contractors with advertising the open positions, and they've been incredibly proactive in terms of their recruiting. We've increased the limit on our call a ride service, which is a supplemental taxi service, to $40. It previously was $20, so a rider would pay the first 3, we would cover up to $20. We now cover up to $40, which pretty much gets a rider anywhere within our service area, and so that's a great option for people who want to use that. We're continuing to look at improvements on the system in terms of an app for mobility that will allow people to make booking and cancellations on their phone. It will also include real-time location tracking, and we're expecting that to launch later this spring. I think the biggest improvement is going to be the 3 new operations and maintenance contracts that were approved by the Board of Public Works last week. So I think we realized going down to the 2 contractors that our system is just a little bit too big for 2. So we are now back to 3 contractors. One of the new contractor that we're bringing on has 40 staff that are kind of ready to go as soon as they go through training. So once we bring them on, that'll have an immediate impact. We've also made a lot of changes to how we've done the contracts. We've been talking with our peers throughout the industry. I think the contract that we have here is kind of a first in the industry contract that really does incentivize proper staffing, timely service, and changes the payment structure to incentivize the contractors to deliver. It builds in additional wage increases as well. And so we're looking forward to seeing how that improves our system. And I will note this past January, we did see the highest on-time performance since February of 2021. Again, we're not there yet. We're not letting our foot off the gas. And so we're going to continue to push forward on that.
Madam Chair, before you move on, could I ask you what the definition of on-time performance is?
For mobility, there's a 30-minute window that we use.
So it could be 30 minutes early or 30 minutes late, and that's on time.
Yes. Yep, and I do recognize that that isn't ideal. So we continue to see what we can do to improve that. And we'll track whenever our riders are arriving closer to their scheduled time. So we try to get it as close to that scheduled time as possible.
Yeah. Thank you.
Holly, you almost probably want to mention that those are federal standards, federal regulations and guidelines.
Yes, thanks, Secretary Ports. That's a great point.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
Sorry about that. So overhauling our rail fleet. Steve mentioned some of the biggest drivers of our capital program outside of the purple line are our rail improvements. So the metro, rail car, and train control replacement projects. It's over $400 million for 78 new vehicles and a comprehensive replacement of the train control system. We're working diligently on that and looking to have the first vehicle arrive hopefully later this year. There's a number of car sets that are down in Miami right now being put together. On the light rail side, we are halfway through our $160 million overhaul program for the current light rail fleet. And we've also begun planning and funded the first part of replacement of those vehicles for the modern low floor replacement fleet. So rather than the kind of big behemoth vehicles that we have now, you'll see the modern ones that are low floor and are more rider friendly. Zero emission buses. I know that's near and dear to your heart, Chair Corman. We are well underway with our zero emission bus transition, meeting the goal of transitioning to 50% by 2030. And we have no plans for any diesel procurements after FY23. It does include significant infrastructure, workforce, and planning considerations. Buying buses is actually really easy. We can go buy electric buses right now. The issue is we need to ensure that we can charge them and that they can run on the routes that we have. And I think even the bigger piece of that is ensuring that our operators, that our mechanics, that our dispatchers all know how to use these buses and how they what their jobs need to change. And so we're doing a lot of work right now to prep for the training, change the SOPs for our maintenance, and we're coordinating with the union to ensure that they are going to be ready to go when the new vehicles come. We have a pilot at our new Kirk bus facility that will be underway next year. So we purchased 7 electric buses, and that was approved by the Board of Public Works in January. So those will be coming early in 2023. 5 overhead chargers will be installed in our Kirk bus facility, and we're working closely with Baltimore Gas and Electric on utility upgrades to that facility. I also want to discuss Fast Forward. So this is our customer experience enhancement projects that really encompasses a lot of the focus of the agency right now. How do we make our system faster? How do we make it more accessible? And how do we make it easier to use? So this is a $43 million initiative to improve reliability, reduce travel times, and increase safety and access. So we have, again, more dedicated bus lanes, really kind of building out that dedicated bus lane network in the city. We have making it more accessible through ADA improvements and pedestrian improvements near our bus stops, especially in coordination with Baltimore City. We want to ensure that everyone is able to use our system and it needs to be accessible. We're adding more bus shelters and new and enhanced transit hubs that make transferring easier. And then finally, making it easier to use, better signage and wayfinding throughout. We've been coordinating with a variety of groups to ensure that our signage as well is accessible and that folks know how to use it. And again, adding more real-time information to the system. I want to end just highlighting our strategic plan. MTA launched this last summer, talking kind of, the next 3 to 5 years as we emerge from the pandemic, what we're going to be looking to have prioritize and how we're going to be, rebuilding better from the pandemic. So there's a number of different priorities in here. I think the main one I did want to highlight was centering equity. So we're going to continue to ensure that as we make decisions that equity is the center of that. And so we are ensuring that in service planning and resource allocation, it is included in our project prioritization process and our budgeting process. We're really ensuring that happens. Internally, we launched an Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee in October of 2020 that has done a lot of work, and it continues to tell us ways on how we can do things better at the agency, including hiring a Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer. That position is under development right now. And as always, we're committed to M&DB efforts to ensure that we have participation for minority and disadvantaged firms. And with that, I'm going to address the other question that Steve had. So returning to the analysis, on the first issue, I think I covered that in my PowerPoint regarding the mobility performance. On the second request to brief the committees on the steps that MTA is taking to address the gap between program capital spending and actual expenditures. So I'll note it's always our goal to have our program capital budget closely aligned with our actual expenditures. As Steve noted in his analysis, the past few years have brought with them some additional difficulties when we're considering the program budget with actual expenditures. Primarily, the COVID-19 pandemic has had a significant impact on our ability to expend capital dollars at the rate that we previously achieved. Two of our major projects that I mentioned, the Metro project and the light rail project, were impacted by quarantines, by material supply, delays due to supply chain, and crew availability. I will say, kudos to my team throughout it all. They've been focused on delivering those projects that our riders depend on. And as we emerge from this pandemic, they're focused on adjusting project schedules and budgets to more closely align with the environment. And we believe that these steps will help to address the discrepancies between the program dollars and our final expenditures. And so with that said, I am happy to answer any questions from the committee.
Thank you, Administrator. I would encourage you to watch that issue pretty closely. WMATA, my friends over there in the pre-COVID environment, one year were at 66% expended of what they had budgeted, still holding their hands out, which was a pretty hard pill to swallow. So colleagues, do you have any questions for the Maryland Transit Administration? Vice Chair Chang.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I very much appreciate the Maryland Transit Administration being here, as the Secretary reports. And Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you so much on behalf of the Legislative District 32 delegation for your leadership as far as the tragic incident happened on February 2nd, 2022. And if I may, I'd like to ask a few questions regarding that. Administrator, first of all, I just want to thank you for your leadership and all the proactive measures you've taken since you become the Administrator. Secretary reports, your administrator has done a wonderful job in reaching out and being very on top of things. And actually, one of our first meetings we had together was a joint meeting with the chairwoman of the Appropriations Committee and myself. She had met with us, and it was a very good way to start off a really strong professional relationship. As we all know, our hearts we join the community, and our hearts are really going out with deepest sympathy and condolences to the family of Lamar Patterson and the tragic incident that happened on February 2nd, 2022 on West Maple Road and Camp Mead Road in Linthicum. And Madam Administrator, I want to thank you for everything that you've done since then. And I do have some questions regarding that incident. Understanding that it is currently under investigation, I was wondering if MTA has any updates that they can provide publicly at this time.
Yeah, no, that was an incredibly tragic incident. Personally, it definitely had a huge impact, and safety is priority for MTA always. And so anytime something like that happens, we participate fully in investigations and do our own safety investigations. We're coordinating with the Anne Arundel County Police, who is leading that investigation. So at this point, there's not much that I can share, but when there is, we'll be happy to provide that information and do a full briefing on that.
Okay, thank you. And at this time, what is the current MTA policy regarding inspections of cross arms at grade level road crossings?
Yeah, so cross arms are one of the numerous things that we do preventive maintenance on. And so we have a cycle where every 30 days, which is what's recommended by the industry, we do an inspection and any preventive maintenance on the gate arms that is necessary.
Okay. And is there any history of service at the intersection that we're talking about with regards to West Maple Road and also Camp Mead Road with regards to the crossing arms there?
So we're going to provide that to the Anne Arundel County Police as part of the investigation, any history of that.
Okay. And then on February 19th of this year, and actually it was a little more than 2 weeks after the tragic incident, there was a long period of time actually where the cross arms were not functioning properly. What assurances can the MTA have for the community with regards to the safety of these cross arms and these crossings?
Yeah, so on the 19th, that was this past Saturday. And if you'll remember, it was incredibly windy that day. So our gate arms, anytime that it's windy, they go up and down, can get hit by wind gusts. So that's what happened there on the 19th. Wind gusts took out the gate arm. As soon as we realized that it happened, we sent MTA police, and they were there to monitor and ensure safety. And they will do that across the system at every gate arm where that happens. I think one thing that I will note for the community and for really everyone who's traveling around a rail line is that we do have the red lights that are flashing. And so even if the gate arm isn't down, if the red lights are flashing, stop. There will likely be a train coming. And so I think that's important to notice. We also have been working with the community. I think there's a community meeting coming up in early March, and MTA Police and MTA Safety will be out to talk with the community about how to ensure safety around rail crossings.
Thank you very much. I know that the community is looking forward to that. And this is a county plan, but in 2003, there was a small area plan that was produced. And one of the recommendations was that specifically at West Maple Road and Camp Mead Road, that crossing right there would not be at a grade level, that there be a grade separation. And are there any plans or thoughts, or has there been any plans or thoughts developed as far as changing the configuration? Specifically, if we go a little bit further north, where the North Linthicum stop is crossing over Maryland 648 Barnum Abbotts Boulevard, there's a above grade level crossing separation.
Yeah, we took a look at that plan from 2003. As far as I can tell, there hasn't been anything done since then. One thing I will note is in the most recent Anne Arundel County Plan, Move Anne Arundel, that was published in 2019, there wasn't any requests for removing the at-grade crossings in those areas, and it hasn't come up in our coordination with Anne Arundel County. I will say it would be incredibly expensive and disruptive to the area. You can't just kind of go up. There's grade issues that have to be considered. And so, I don't have details on that, but I think given all the needs of the agency and that it hasn't been a priority.
Thank you. And then just for clarification, has there been any studies from MTA with regard to grade separation?
Not that I've seen, no.
Okay. And then Linthicum, Northern Anne Arundel County, community spirit, we're definitely, that's the spirit that we have there. It's how can the community, the MTA, the county, how can we all work together to make these crossings safe and perhaps work to have grade separated crossings?
I mean, I think the first step is we'll happy to attend the community meeting and have a good understanding of what those concerns are. We can share what our processes are, what it would take, and then take it from there.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, the last question. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. This regards to actually the first hearing that we had together, and this is outside of the scope of crossings, is that the Cromwell stop in Glen Burnie and also the Linthicum stop behind the Royal Farms, it's always often been an area of incidents happening there. And if not now, if you could provide later a report of the calls of service to that area, to those stops specifically. If there's anything any information you could provide at a macro level now, it'd be appreciated.
Yeah, I'm happy to send the reports from MTA Police. I will note that MTA Police do regularly look at hotspots for crime throughout the system. None of the ones in that area have risen to the level of being a hotspot. I think there's very little crime that gets reported to us there. We do coordinate through a memorandum of understanding with the Anne Arundel County Police. And we're always committed to safety on our system. You know, I always have to brag that MTA is one of the safest transit systems out of the top 12 in the nation. And so, again, happy to follow up with more details on specific calls in that area.
Great. Thank you very much, Madam Administrator, for answering all the questions. Again, our community just mourns for this young man, Lamar Patterson, who just with the tragic incident, he had a lot of hope and promise for him in the future. And our deepest sympathies go to his family, and our community is definitely really mourning for this loss. And Mr. Chairman Corman, just want to thank you so much again for your leadership with regards to this prior to this meeting. And thank you very much, Secretary Ports. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. I do want to just note, since Secretary Ports is here, I actually think this is 2 state roads that are meeting the light rail line. So it's not just an MTA issue, and hopefully that's one of the benefits of having a multimodal department. We can make sure everyone's talking to see, even if it's not a full non-at-grade crossing, because those are very expensive and difficult to do. There might be other things that can be done to improve the safety and avoid tragic incidents like this one. I do want to shift topics a little bit, Madam Administrator, to the commuter buses. So first of all, just generally interested, last year we included in the bipartisan bicameral bi-branch relief act some funds for the commuter bus operators. So I guess I'm just generally curious how they're doing, what the service level looks like right now, ridership and so forth, just generally.
Yeah, the Department of Commerce, I believe, distributed those commuter bus funds, and we provided information to them on our commuter bus providers so that they could participate in that. Our commuter bus ridership is down now, still about 80%. It relies pretty heavily on federal employees who have not returned to work on a full-time basis. We did return to full service August 30th of this past year. Some of the commuter bus operators have had a difficult time with recruiting operators, similar to our mobility service, similar to kind of what the entire region and really the entire country is seeing in terms of operator recruitment. So we have, in a few select cases, reduced the service. Again, based on ridership, we're having buses with 1 or 2 people on them. And so we feel that reducing the service to the levels that we can provide and ensuring that folks know that it's going to be there is better than missing those trips.
Thank you. Do you recall how many different contractors there are for the commuter bus service, roughly?
I don't recall off the top of my head. I can get that for you.
Okay, just in the interest of time, I received some complaints about the safety oversight of some of those commuter bus operators, so I can follow up with you offline about that, but obviously that was very concerning to hear that there was sort of a concern that they were not all sort of meeting the standards that I think MTA sets for them, and it wasn't really clear how to ensure they're meeting those standards, what the inspection process was, or anything like that. Obviously they're going through a troubled time, an 80% drop in ridership and recruitment troubles, but for the 20% that is riding, we want to make sure that the systems or the buses are meeting your requirements. So but I can follow up with you about that.
Yeah, I'm happy to follow up with that. I'll note that even though this service has been reduced, we are still following our full inspection procedures. We have a very robust procedure for our team to go out. They monitor, do spot checks of maintenance records. And so I'm happy to provide that to you.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would love to hear, and you don't have to tell me now, but you can just provide, what that inspection regime is, what's sort of regularly done. That would be helpful. Colleagues, any other questions for the Maryland Transit Administration? Okay, well, Mr. Secretary, Madam Administrator, thank you, Madam Administrator. That may be your last time before us this session, so you've gone through the marathon with us. And Mr. Secretary, unfortunately, not the case for you. We'll see you again really soon. So appreciate it.
I would say not unfortunately, but that's okay, Mr. Chairman. We will see you soon for sure.
Well, thank you both and to your teams as well. With that, colleagues, we will turn to the Department of Agriculture. And I'll just note that the Capital Subcommittee is going to be delaying at least for a little bit for those of us who have to be in both. But with that, let's turn to our Department of Agriculture analysis with Andrew Gray from the Department of Legislative Services.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I now present the Maryland Department of Agriculture's operating budget summary. There you see it's a $1.4 million increase. Actually, with the supplemental budget that came in, it's only a $600,000 increase now because there's $800,000 being brought in fiscal 22. In terms of the federal fiscal or federal stimulus funds, the Maryland Farmer COVID-19 Relief Program was allocated $10 million and was using around $4.9 million of that. And Marbidco also received $2 million as well in federal funding. In terms of the deficiency for fiscal 22, there's funding for the Salisbury Animal Health Laboratory operating costs. The new lab has been opened, and therefore costs are kind of increased in terms of the needs there. And also you're seeing increases for gypsy moths and finally for midges and black flies as well. And just note that the supplemental budget did bring in an additional $800,000 for midges as well. Exhibit 1 reflects the overview of the agency spending, Office of Resource Conservation salaries, and cover crops main funding there. In terms of the budget, seeing that it's now a $600,000 increase or so. And for major changes in terms of the personnel, $122,000 for soil conservation district positions that are hired above the salary base, or 53 positions were allowed for in the Chesapeake Atlantic Coastal Base 2010 Trust Fund. And they've hired all the 6 of those. And there are 3 positions that are abolished. There's a $190,000 reduction for that. In terms of the big budget increases, of $3.3 million or so for the Rural Maryland Prosperity Investment Fund. And there's around $2.5 million for the Tree Solutions Now Act. And then finally, there's $1 million for new Marbidco programs, Maryland Agricultural Resource-Based Industry Development Corporation programs. Those are programs that are really kind of following on from some of the $2 million they received in federal stimulus money and continuing that work. In terms of some of the large decreases, the one-time deficiencies for black fly and midge spraying, it's now increased as a result of that supplemental budget item that came in. And there's $2.5 million is for the Next Generation Farmland Acquisition Program that's currently in the dedicated purpose account, and therefore this decrease will then be basically mitigated once that budget amendment is processed. Moving to the personnel data, 3 positions down, abolished 3 long-term vacant positions. And MDA's overall vacancies do increase, but the long-term vacancies are decreasing. They're being able to fill those long-term vacancies, but still challenged by the overall hiring environment. In terms of the key observations here, the Maryland Agricultural Climate Vulnerability Assessment was a Joint Chairman's Report request last year. In terms of what it would take for here, our Hughes Center for Agroecology notes that basically finding out what we know, finding out what we don't know, and then it's doing an assessment. The overall cost is around $500,000 over 2 years. However, there doesn't appear to be any money in the budget for this purpose. Department of Legislative Services recommends MDA comment on whether that's in fact true. And if that is in fact true, then how is this assessment going to be done if there is no funding? Is MDA able to do it within its own resources? Is there another pot of money? In terms of the second observation, the cover crop program, they're kind of looking at taking this to the new level of performance-based or outcome-based funding for the program that would look at nutrient and sediment reductions and also healthy soils benefits as well. The idea being that you would pay then for particular outcomes. In terms of what the cover crop program looks like, it's really weather dependent. And so that's one of the challenges the program has. Aerial seeding seems to help in terms of planes going out there and seeding, but that is also compromised by the weather because heavy weather means the planes can't go out and seed too. DLS recommends that NGA comment on the plans for a cover crop plus program and outcome-based program be perhaps over 5 years of incentive-based payments. How that would work given weather variability and agricultural market shifts, and then whether there's any benefits from aerial seeding in terms of being able to resolve some of those issues. Final page here, recommended actions concur with the governor's allowance. Unless there are any questions, that concludes the presentation.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the analyst? Okay, I do not see any, so we can turn to the department and Secretary Bartenfelder. And I'm sorry, Delegate Beitzel, do you have a question?
I didn't. I had the bar up there and went to lower it and raise my hand. So I have a question, but I'll hold it for the department.
Well, let me turn to the department, Secretary Bartenfelder and crew, it says on your display there. So the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and committee members. It's great to be here to present our budget to you and look forward to seeing you later in the session in person. I'll introduce our team who's here at the table with us. We have to my left, Assistant Secretary Eric Von Paris, who's head of fiscal services. And to his left is Assistant Secretary Kevin Conroy, who's in charge, as mentioned earlier, of the nuisance insect program. And we also have John Nickerson, our fiscal officer, down at the end of the table, who's out of camera range. And we have our Assistant Secretary Cassie Shirk, who's head of marketing and animal services, and also Assistant Secretary Hans Schmidt, who is with Resource Conservation, who I believe has a couple issues in the questions to address with all of you. You may notice that we have missing our new Deputy Secretary, Steve Conley. Drew a blank on that.
Forgot me already.
There he is. See, he appeared. He's at our Emergency Operations Center, which is in Dover, Delaware right now, and I'll comment on that. For years now, you've heard us talk about the threat of high-path avian influenza, and Andrew's real familiar with that. And for years, it's been a threat, but a commercial poultry flock has tested positive for high-path avian influenza at a Delaware farm. The farm showed increased mortality over the past few days, and following an investigation by the Delaware Department of Agriculture and the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Veterinary Services Lab confirmed poultry from this farm tested positive for high-path avian influenza. Avian influenza is an airborne respiratory virus that spreads easily among chickens through nasal and eye secretions, as well as manure. The virus can be spread in various ways from flock to flock, including by wild birds, through contact with infected poultry by equipment, and on clothing and shoes by caretakers. MDA, along with the Delaware Department of Agriculture, has worked in close coordination with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the University of Delaware, and the commercial poultry industry. We're working with those departments and its partner agencies to contain the situation and take several precautionary measures. These include taking samples from quarantined backyard poultry flocks within a 3-mile radius and of the flock location, and commercial growers are also conducting testing of flocks in that radius and implementing enhanced biosecurity. Steve is on site there. He's got to leave us very shortly to do an interagency call. But if you have any questions that would relate to that with him, and he's there on site, we could do that now or move on, whatever your pleasure is.
Any of my colleagues have questions about that issue? Delegate Beitzel. You went back on mute, Delegate.
Can I hold the question until he's reported?
Oh, sure. Sorry, I was just checking if anyone had questions for God, I hate to say this out loud, another influenza situation. But it doesn't sound like we do, Mr. Secretary, so please continue on.
Okay, I'll turn now to Assistant Secretary Hans Schmidt, who can address your issues.
So the first question and concern was for the department to comment on whether there was any funding in the fiscal 2023 state budget for the agricultural climate vulnerability assessment. And if there were no funds, have MDA prepared to discuss how the assessment would be completed without the funds. The short answer is there is no funding in the fiscal 2023 state budget for the agricultural climate vulnerability assessment. The Harry R. Hughes Center for Agroecology took the lead on this project. We worked with them in developing a report that it was submitted to you all a couple of weeks ago. That report identified resource needs to do a vulnerability assessment. The report states that new funding would be needed over 2 years. And to answer your second question, if no funding is granted, the vulnerability assessment probably would not be developed. We do not have funding in any of our other funding sources to do this report. The second question worked around the Cover Crop Plus program and an outcomes-based approach. And based off of some of the weather issues and so forth that kind of restrict or hamper farmers from planting cover crops, and talk a little bit about, some of those discussions. Every year we evaluate the cover crop program to make it better, to make it more enticing to farmers, to address some of our water quality needs, to meeting the Chesapeake Bay WIP goals. We are currently evaluating an outcomes-based approach. We are analyzing potential enhancements such as a multi-purpose or multi-year cover crop program that would help support healthy soils. We do encourage the use of aerial seeding to ensure that early planted cover crops can be planted. We do that through incentives to make sure that those cover crops are planted either late summer or early fall. Weather challenges are still going to exist no matter what. Pilots are limited by the weather, whether it's rain or wind. We can't get around that. And then there are also other parts of the state that are restricted, that have air restrictions for pilots where they cannot maneuver. We do, as we do every year, anticipate presenting potential changes to the Cover Crop Technical Advisory Committee for their concurrence this spring.
Are there any questions that the members have?
Let me see. Colleagues, any questions? I assume you concur with the recommendation to concur with the governor's allowance, right?
We do.
Yeah. Delegate Beitzel, did you have a question?
Yes, probably. Secretary Bartenfelder, how you and your crew doing under this pandemic situation on the farms in Maryland?
Well, we've been busy, and now this HPAI incident has made us a lot more busier. I think that farmers are resilient, and they've gotten through the pandemic years, not unscathed, but at least made it through.
I have a question about the cover crop program and the aerial application of the seeds. How does that hold up as far as what it costs to apply to use that method for application of cover crop seeds, to fly it in rather than use drills or spreaders or whatever? How's that cost compared to that method compared to traditional methods?
Well, the aerial seeding and cover crop program is very popular among the farmers. They see it as a means to getting the cover crops seeded without having to run their equipment across. It gets one task done before they get real busy into harvest and so forth. As far as the cost, we think, our cost share, what we are providing, the incentive on top to get those farmers, to get those pilots out there, to get them scheduled early enough, is meeting whatever the demand and whatever the costs are to get the job done.
And on the corn, it allows them to do earlier planting.
Yeah. Then, as far as doing the aerial application when you still have corn, does this application, are you applying it after you harvest the corn, or is the corn still there when you do the application?
The corn is still standing in the field. And then, and when farmers are going in to harvest their corn, they typically will see a cover crop already established itself. When the corn dries down, sunlight will get down in there, and usually you'll see a green canopy underneath, between the rows.
And so that doesn't damage the cover crop the cover crop to the point to where their fields are rutted and that sort of thing. So you get complete cover using this method.
Yeah, we've had really good success with our pilots. Our pilots are very skilled. We usually get pretty good coverage. And one of the requirements for aerial seeding is that they need to apply at a 25% rate above the typical seeding rate, so that we can guarantee, so that we have more assurance that we'll have a good seeding.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have one other question, probably of Eric. The pest on the pest programs, and I just wonder if you could report a little bit how, you know, we used to have a real serious problem with gypsy moth. Is that pest pretty much controlled now, or are there still ongoing studies or any indication that the gypsy moth is still prevalent?
It is. The name change. Oh, not yet. The gypsy moth is still prevalent. Not so much in Western Maryland this year. We anticipate spraying a few thousand acres on the lower shore. We actually are just waiting right now for DGS to put our contract out. But that's the money we have in the budget will allow us to do this. We get a large part of the money from the feds and the counties to let us accomplish this. Some years it's very minimal impact, but this last year it's just the gypsy moth has expanded, and unfortunately we've had to spray last year on the lower shore. We were hoping that would contain it, but again, we're gonna have to do it this season. We want to get out there in the next realistically 2 months before the canopy starts growing.
All right, haven't noticed it out here, thankfully, but there is another pest, woolly adelgid, that's in the hemlock. I know in some of our state parks and stuff, it's been a problem, and fortunately I haven't seen it on my farm, but in the areas around Garrett County and even around the lake, I've seen some areas. Can you report on the prevalence of that, maybe, or what is there any danger of that continuing to go, or hope that it'll go away?
We're never going to get rid of it, unfortunately. But our team has worked with DNR and private landowners to get access to properties. We treat thousands of trees every year on state property and on private properties as well. So we think we have it under control for the time being, but unfortunately, we're never going to get rid of it.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Delegate Beitzel. Delegate Metzger.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Bartenfelder. Sort of good to see you today. I'm going to ask you about the midges. So can you kind of give me an update and where we're at, and have we got an increase, and we're going to get rid of them this year once and for all?
Well, Delegate Metzger, I am pleased to tell you that we've worked very closely with County Executive John Olszewski, and he's worked with us, and not only will we be treating the problem with the midges this year, but we're working closely with him to develop a 2-year plan for this year and next year.
Marvelous. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Metzger. Colleagues, I do not see any other questions. We do have a few non-department witnesses who I'll call up now. We have Charlotte Davis from the Rural Maryland Council, Steve McHenry from Marbidco, and Beth Hill from the Maryland Forest Association. And we can now recognize each of you in turn for your requisite 2 minutes, and we can start with Ms. Davis.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee. I'm Charlotte Davis, Executive Director of the Rural Maryland Council. We thank Governor Hogan for the inclusion of the funds for the Rural Maryland Prosperity Investment Fund. I'm really here just to answer any questions, and you have our written statement. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them, and thank you for your past support.
Thank you. Mr. McHenry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's great to be back before you again. Steve McHenry, representing Marbidco. We are delighted to concur with the governor's allowance as well. It includes the normal items that you typically see, and you've been very supportive of, plus an additional $1 million for 2 programs that are basically holdovers from last year's Relief Act programs. We established 5 programs using $2 million that were allocated last year, and we were overwhelmed, and particularly overwhelmed in 2 areas. One with livestock processing equipment grant requests, and also in the forest products industry sector. to support our forest industries. And we need to continue these programs for another cycle, and we're very pleased that the governor included funding for both of them. You have my written testimony, so I'll stop there.
Great. Mr. McHenry, as I said at the top, I don't know if you were in here, I was at a hearing for the Great Maryland Outdoors Act, which I believe includes some front-loaded funding from our BidCo.
Yes.
It seemed like a lot. So I guess I was just curious if you wanted to explain how you would be able to absorb that if that bill passes.
Well, it's my understanding that the sponsors want to forward fund all of the agricultural related POS payback funding that's out for several years. So they're accelerating all of that and putting it into FY24. So we would not spend all 10 million in 1 year. We would hold that for 2 programs that we currently offer under the Next Gen banner. Plus, we're also looking at an urban ag Next Gen program to add to our repertoire of land access programming around land conservation.
Great. Thank you very much. We can now turn to Beth Hill, the Maryland Forest Association.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chairman and members of the committee, for allowing me the opportunity to voice my support for the allocation to MARBIDCO for fiscal year 23, the Wood Processing Equity Investment Program, otherwise referred to as the WIPI program. That's what we call it. For the record, I'm Beth Hill, Executive Director of the Maryland Forest Association. For those of you that don't know, MFA is a membership-driven nonprofit organization that represents the forest community statewide. We are conservation-minded people who want to see forests remain as forest and believe that this is best accomplished with strong markets. So we believe the forest that pays stays. Our membership categories include forest landowners, foresters, natural resource professionals, loggers, haulers, primary and secondary manufacturers, and end users such as hunt clubs, hikers, and concerned citizens. So think of our membership categories as a supply chain. Over 70% of our members are family forest landowners that rely on the expertise and the markets that the industry provides to help them meet their various management goals, be it clean air and water, improving wildlife habitat, timber production, or simply improving the health of the forest. It's essential to point out who we are not, which is land clearing and development, which we are often confused with. So as many of you know, the forest products industry has been declining for several years, and the pandemic only exacerbated that problem. The recently completed economic adjustment strategy with which MFA assisted with, and also many departments contributed to, MDA, Commerce, MDE, a whole host of MARBIDCO, others all contributed to the study. It was a 2-year study that set forth several goals, and MARBIDCO's WIPI program can help meet some of the goals outlined in the study. So access to funds will allow primary and secondary wood manufacturers, processors, including loggers, to upgrade equipment, improve their efficiencies, create new markets, and embrace new technology. So I think it's also important to note that since the Verso mill closure, that was kind of the last of the big business in the forestry sector. So what we have now is more of a cottage industry comprised of small operators and family businesses. So last year, the WIPI Fund received fund requests from these companies for upwards of $1.9 million. And they were able to partially fund 20 projects, which helped operations rebound and pivot following the closures and impacts felt by the pandemic. I respectfully ask that you approve this second round of funding that will improve forest health, feed money into the local economy, and serve to create and retain jobs in the forestry sector. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Great. Thank you very much, Ms. Hill. Any questions from my colleagues? Delegate Beitzel. Still got to unmute.
Got it. Beth, I have a question. Yeah, thank you for your work. Been working with all my constituents and colleagues out here. There's been, have you seen any or have any concerns about conflicts with the solar energy projects and stuff that are coming in like there's a 900-acre solar energy project on Backbone Mountain where they obviously will clear cut all the trees that are there. And there will be a lot of impervious surface and that sort of thing, you know, from that project. And I'm not really concerned about the runoff or the pollution or anything. But, you know, our woods, our 50-year-old forest oak trees produce about 30,000, sequester about 30,000 pounds of CO2 per acre. And so I just wonder if your industries had any thoughts or any concerns about any conflict with renewable energy projects compared to us being able to manage our forest out here.
So I would say this, I think renewable energy is definitely a hot topic these days. And I think that all renewables have their place. So I think that solar makes sense in a lot of places. I don't think it makes sense to put it on prime and productive farmland. And I don't think it makes sense to clear forest land to install solar panels either. I do think that same forest land, you could, you know, potentially could play a small part in the RPS, a very small part, not nearly as big as what solar can, but using, you know, the small pulpwood, the crooked inferior trees that are removed during a timber harvest normally would have gone to the Luke paper mill. Using those kind of materials to fuel combined heat and power projects makes more sense than permanently clearing a forest. So without those markets, you know, I know forest management is often greatly misunderstood. People don't understand the reasons for it, but right now without those pulpwood markets, you know, there's only markets for the bigger, better trees, and the smaller, inferior trees are being left behind, and that's not going to lead to a healthy forest in the future.
Thank you, Beth, for those comments, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Great. Any other questions from my colleagues? Okay, well, colleagues, on Capitol, that is starting at 4:30, I am told, and I believe tomorrow is a full committee day. But with that, this subcommittee is adjourned. Thank you all so much for your engagement this afternoon.
Thank you.